First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
Through the practice of generosity, we are connected, made whole, better able to be the people we want to be. Generosity isn't entirely about money, but it does include money. Money, money, money. If you are unusually self-aware, you might have noticed a very slight feeling of tightening or closing at just the mention of the word. And if you're that self-aware and spiritually evolved, you may have allowed that reaction to pass on as quickly as it arose. If you didn't notice it, that doesn't mean it's not in there, pulling the strings of your reactivity unconsciously. Research suggests that simply having the idea of money planted in mind has a tendency sometimes to reduce inclinations to generosity. So I'm taking a risk by just saying the word money. I'm hoping that knowing something about human psychology around money will allow us to consciously override the usual unconscious reactivity. The average income per person worldwide is less than $10,000 a year. Perhaps your income is a little above world average. Our very wealth can itself make us less generous if we let it, if we don't intentionally counteract the effects of wealth through a deliberate practice of generosity. In one study, experimenters enlisted undergraduates to play Monopoly, 2 players at a time, but with different rules. One randomly selected player started the game with $2,000 of Monopoly money and got $200 for passing go each time and threw 2 dice for every move, which, you might recall, is the normal way Monopoly is played. Let's call this player Bob. The other player, let's call him Bill, started with only $1,000 and only got $100 for passing go each time and threw 1 die for every move. The students play for 15 minutes under the watchful eye of 2 video cameras, while down the hall, researchers huddle around a computer screen recording the subject's every facial twitch and hand gesture. So what happens? Initially, Bob reacted to the inequality between him and his opponent with a series of smirks, an acknowledgement perhaps of the inherent awkwardness of the situation. Hey, his expression seemed to say, this is weird and unfair, but whatever. Soon, though, as he whizzes around the board, purchasing properties and collecting rent, whatever discomfort he feels seems to dissipate. He balloons in size, spreading his limbs toward the far ends of the table. He smacks his playing piece as he makes the circuit, smack, 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 ending his turns with a board-shattering bang. And as the game nears its finish, Bob moves his piece faster and faster. He is all efficiency. He refuses to meet Bill's gaze. His expression is stone cold as he takes the loser's cash. Privilege can function to shut down compassion if we don't consciously decide not to let it. Another study showed through quizzes and online games and questionnaires and in-lab manipulations and field studies that living high on the socioeconomic ladder can, colloquially speaking, dehumanize people. It can make them less ethical, more selfish, more insular, less compassionate than other people. In one experiment, wealthier people were more likely to take candy from a bowl of sweets designated for children. If there is such a thing as entitlement culture, it's more often the wealthy who feel most entitled. As psychologist Paul Piff concludes, while having money doesn't necessarily make anybody anything, the rich are way more likely to prioritize their own self-interests above the interests of other people. It makes them more likely to exhibit characteristics that we would stereotypically associate with, say, jerks. People higher up on the socioeconomic ladder are about 3 times more likely to cheat than other people on the lower rungs. The extent to which people with money behave as if the world revolves around them was further illustrated in another study. Paul Piff and his research team spent 3 months hanging out at a gritty, busy corner with a 4-way stop. They would stake out the intersection at rush hour, crouching behind a bank of shrubs, and catalog the cars that came by, giving each vehicle a grade from 1 to 5. A new model Mercedes would be a 5. An old battered Honda would be a 1. And then the researchers would observe the driver's behavior. A third of people who drove grade 5 cars, Piff found, rolled into the intersection without first coming to a complete stop. Upper-class drivers were the most likely to cut off other vehicles, even when controlling for the time of day, the driver's sex, as it appeared to be to the observers, and the amount of traffic. A similar experiment tested drivers' regard for pedestrians. A researcher would enter a zebra crossing as a car approached it. The results were more staggering. Fully half of the grade 5 cars cruised right into the crosswalk. It's like they didn't even see them, said Piff. Timothy Judge of Notre Dame, Beth Livingston of Cornell, and Charlize Hurst of the University of Western Ontario published a study, Do Nice Guys and Gals Really Finish Last? Subjects were asked to assess whether they had a forgiving nature or found fault with others, whether they were trusting or cold, considerate or cooperative. And then they were given an agreeableness score. Men with the lowest agreeableness score earned $42,000 in a given year, and those with the highest agreeableness earned an average of $31,000 a year. In another study, researchers Kathleen Vose merely planted the idea of money in subjects' minds. As the subjects filled out questionnaires, some of them were in a room with Monopoly present, left over from a prior Monopoly game, and some were not. Vose got her results only after the subject believed the session was over. Heading for the door, he would bump into a person whose arms were piled precariously high with books and office supplies. That person, who worked for Vose, would drop 27 little yellow pencils like those that you get at a golf course. Every subject in the study bent down to help pick up the mess, but the money-primed subjects picked up 15% fewer pencils than the control group. That's just from the thought of money being planted by having monopoly money nearby. Vose stressed that money priming did not make her subjects malicious, it just made them uninterested. She said, I don't think they mean any harm, but picking up pencils is just not their problem. Over and over, Vose found that money can make people antisocial, can make them less prosocial. She primes subjects by seating them near a screensaver showing currency floating like fish in a tank, or asking them to de-scramble sentences, some of which include words like bill, check, cash. And then she tests their sensitivity to other people. In her science article, Vose showed that money-primed subjects gave less time to a colleague in need of assistance and less money to a hypothetical charity. When asked to pull up a chair so a stranger might join a meeting, money-primed subjects placed the chair at greater distance from themselves than those in a control group. When asked how they would prefer to spend their leisure time, money-primed people choose a personal cooking lesson over a catered group dinner. Given a choice between working collaboratively or alone, they opted to go solo. In some ways, on some measures, there may be a plus side. Thinking about money makes people more oriented to efficiency and productivity, like Bob, the advantaged monopoly player who became all efficiency. Money focuses, encourages thoughts of self-sufficiency, less willing to help, but also less feeling of need to be helped. Research so far hazards no guess as to where the tipping point is, after which personality transformation kicks in, and that point is surely highly variable from individual to individual. There is a basic human tendency to protect what we have, and the more we have, the stronger our tendency to put energy into the having. It requires intentionality to avoid being sucked into that pattern. So we come to the spiritual practice of generosity. Deliberate generosity counteracts that self-orientation. Warm-heartedness also reduces blood pressure, anxiety, and stress, and improves health. You've got however much money you've got. How much of it can you give away and still meet your material needs? Give it away. We can make it into something that connects us to others, that connects us to the world's suffering, because otherwise it will be a force of disconnection, tending to make us less social and less caring. Giving it away as a regular practice, weekly if possible, you will never meet a generous person who is bitter or a bitter person who is generous. That bears remembering. Generosity and bitterness are incompatible. It's not entirely clear whether generosity causes a reduction in bitterness or reduction in bitterness causes generosity, just as it isn't always clear whether wealth causes disagreeableness or disagreeableness facilitates wealth acquisition. Either way, they go together. And we'll pause here for our interlude, some music that perhaps is magnanimous. Generosity, also known as hospitality, kindness, largesse, benevolence, bounteousness, magnanimity, open-handedness, warm-heartedness, compassion, life as overflow, enriches our lives. When we live from an awareness of abundance rather than in the grip of the delusion of scarcity, generosity becomes possible, and generosity grows through practice. To develop in an area requires disciplined commitment. The skilled athletes are not the ones who exercise when they happen to be in the mood for it. The skilled poets or musicians do not just write poetry or rehearse when they feel like it. They show up for daily practice whether they feel like it or not. Generosity develops in us through a disciplined commitment to develop it as a way of being. The baseball catcher and later manager and coach Yogi Berra once said, "You can't hit and think at the same time." He meant that we have to show up for the discipline of training our habit muscles so that the habit muscles can be our guide when, as in most of what we do in the days of our lives, there isn't time or inclination to think them through very much. For hitting, as for many functions, we must rely on habits. So the formation of the habits we'll need is crucial. For that matter, even when there is time for reflection, the way we think is going to be governed by feelings and values formed by habit. Consider the story that I have heard of a woman getting off a subway train. And as she readies for climbing the steps to the cold air outside, she reaches into the pockets of her coat for her gloves, and she finds only one glove. The other must have fallen out of her pocket. She turns around and looks back at the subway car, and she can see the seat where she had been sitting, and sure enough, there's her other glove on the seat. But now the doors are closing. She won't have time to get back in and retrieve her glove, so she takes the glove she has and throws it into the subway to fall onto the seat next to its mate, just as the doors close. I love that story. That woman's my hero. I want to be like her. Because one glove, of course, isn't going to do her much good, but now somebody else can have a complete pair. That's the reflex of a person who has cultivated generosity as a deep habit of being, a habit of the heart. It's the reasonable thing to do, but if you rely on reason, the train will be long gone before you've worked it out. Random acts of kindness and senseless beauty flourish as the fruits of disciplined habit formation that is not at all random or senseless. I picked up that story of the woman and her glove from my colleague, Reverend Terry Sweetser. Reverend Sweetser remarked, "You know, she must have lived a long life of generosity, a life of wild and creative generosity of spirit, to be able to think so quickly, to act so urgently and healthily, to know precisely in that moment what would bless the world right then and there. It happened in an instant, but that was planned giving through and through. Something in her past, or everything in her past, prepared her for her gesture. Habits of living and giving practiced and refined her whole life long. As a piece of the happy discipline of generous giving, the piece that has to do with giving away our money, it will help to think in terms of percents. This gift comes from you. It is you, so place it in the context of your overall income. Are you giving away 20%, 10%, 5%? I ask you to decide the percent first. What percent are you going to give away this year? Maybe this year it can be a higher percent than last year. And after you've decided the percent, then do the math and figure out what dollar amount that comes to. Instead of starting by thinking about a dollar amount, think about a percent. Percent of what? Well, the general guideline would be adjusted gross income, AGI. Certain vital expenses are already subtracted, but itemized or standard deductions are not. Adjusted gross income is the benchmark used by researchers into giving rates. What percentage of AGI do you choose to give? The traditional tithe for the church is 10%. The Torah, the central part of the Hebrew Bible, also known as the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, set forth law requiring that 1/10 of all produce, flocks, and cattle be given to support the Levites, the priestly class in ancient Israel. The Torah also emphasized assistance to foreigners, orphans, and widows, those in need, in addition to the tithe of support for the priestly class. The Christian Testament mentions no specific rules about tithing. Jesus is simply clear that we are obligated to be cheerfully generous to those in need. The tithing rules in the Torah were based on the religious and social system of ancient Israel and on an agricultural economy. The Torah is not authoritative for us, and even if it were, it does not address modern-day questions about what percentage we should give, how much to the church, how much to other charities. Still, I do find that there's something psychologically significant about 10%, where you just move the decimal over one place and that's what you give away. If you're just starting out with a generosity practice, giving away 10% is a good start. Those who have been at it longer or better established in life can think about higher percentages. Giving is a crucial part of your spiritual life, a necessary component of your spiritual growth. And growing ethically and spiritually is the mission of this congregation. It's our business, it's our mission, collectively to encourage compassion in each other. It's really good for us to do this. Research from the University of British Columbia and Harvard Business School shows that spending money on someone else, as little as $5 a day, can significantly boost your happiness. Students who practiced random acts of kindness were significantly happier than those who were not given this task. In another study, college students were given money and directed to either spend it on themselves or spend it pro-socially on activities meant to benefit other people. Participants who spent it pro-socially were happier at the end of the day than those who spent it on themselves. Part of your giving goes to charities. Charitable giving is an important part of spiritual practice. And for this, I would encourage you to take a look at a website called givewell.org. They have put thousands of hours into researching which charities are most effective, dollar for dollar, and are underfunded. They search for the charities that save or improve lives the most per dollar. Right now, their charities include the Malaria Consortium, which dispenses malaria prevention medicine, the Against Malaria Foundation, which provides mosquito nets to help reduce risk of exposure to malaria, and Helen Keller International, which provides supplements to counteract vitamin A deficiency in children under 5, and New Incentives, an organization that provides cash incentives for routine childhood vaccines. Those are some good charities to receive a portion of the percentage that you set aside for giving away. How much of a difference can you make? Are you expected to abandon your career? Isn't charity bureaucratic and ineffective anyway? Isn't it a burden to give up so much? Well, once you've decided the total percentage you're going to give away for the sake of the well-being of others and for the sake of your own spiritual well-being, then there's the question of how much of that goes to support your congregation and its programs. If you determine a percent first and then calculate what dollar amount that comes to, your pledge amount will probably not be a nice round number, but you will know that it is a nice round percent. And I know some of you have already filled out your pledge card, but you maybe remember that for next year, or you can revise your pledge card for this year. For your congregation's thriving, and for your thriving as a part of it, I suggest thinking in the range of 3 to 5% of adjusted gross income. Again, the more well-established you are in life, the higher your percentage can be. If you're a young couple just starting out, 2% is a level of generosity you can feel really good about. Pledging is a part of the meaning of membership. It is a part of what makes membership meaningful, and it is a part of your spiritual practice and development. Through the practice of generosity, we are connected, we are made whole, and we are better able to be the people we want to be. May it be so. Amen.